Hult Prize Nigeria Podcast.
Hi, innovators, change makers, and global leaders. My name is Samuel Olomu, and I'm your host for the Hult Prize Podcast. Here on Hult Prize Podcast, we spotlight innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership. It's a platform for bold ideas, for leading questions, and for stories of resilience and grit. So, watch this space. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Samuel Olomu, and I'm PR and communications lead for Hult Prize Nigeria. I'm so happy to have you on this conversation today. I'm very, very happy to see you. I'm very happy to know that you are from the same state as me, which is Ogun State. So you are welcome on the call,
Fantastic. Sir. Honor is mine, and I'm glad to know that too.
Yeah, and we're having this podcast so as to have something like a template to give to our startups and for all of our community to also learn from our judges. I'd like to know about your motivation. Like, what was the motivation? What influenced your career growth, and how has the journey been so far?
Okay. Thanks for having me, Samuel, and a very big thank you to Hult Prize Organization as well. Thanks for having me on board. It's an honor to serve. My motivation. First off, of course, I'm sure you know me, but I'd like to introduce myself again. My name is Farooq. My motivation, I would say, is to bring about change in my environment, my family, my community, and the world at large, really. That's the bottom line. In terms of career, naturally, I was good at Intro-Tech in secondary school, and most of my teachers then would say the natural progression was to go into architecture, which I don't think, if I look back now, that was particularly great advice, because architecture is beyond technical issues or technical skills. But yes, I studied architecture primarily because I was good at technology. And I went to Ghana, I would say, for my BSc in architecture, primarily because my parents, my father in particular, had so much respect for Ghanaians, and in terms of discipline and their approach to education. So I went to the only school at the time that offered architecture in the whole of Ghana, which was in Kumasi, which is the Kwame University of Science and Technology. And then I discovered architecture and what it was, and I early on saw that architecture could help in terms of social change and impact. And I've always been someone who wanted to give impact. My mom was, in our own little way, philanthropist, people. My father also, before he became king, cared for people, and he's a king in Galway. He's the king of Agowe, a place in Ogun State, a large community in Ogun State. So I've been involved, at community level, I would say, since my cradle, in different shapes and forms. So learning architecture, and being exposed to architecture and seeing that it was an opportunity to develop skills to really impact my people, was something I was excited about, when I started that journey. And yes, from then on, I was going deeper and deeper into the subject of architecture. From Ghana, I transitioned to do my MSc at the Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. And the reason why I went to the UK, and particularly the Robert Gordon University, was the library at the Robert Gordon University was designed by an architect that I respect so much, which his name is Lord Norman Foster. His principles, his approach to life, his approach to even community impact as well. And I thought I could learn a thing or two from that, and that will help my formative years. And after that, I moved back to Lagos. So, but in between, of course, I worked in Ghana, in Accra. I also worked a bit in London. I was freelancing as well. Then I moved back to Lagos, because at the end of the day, the goal was to always bring impact to my people. And architecture afforded me that. And I'm forever grateful for the divine direction, I would say, in that. But yeah, essentially, comes in my community. I'm able to add my own quota to life. I'm able to do my bit and be satisfied that I've done uh, the best that I could for myself and everyone around me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that,
Hello.
sir. Thank you so much for that. So while you were speaking, I heard you, and while I was also going through your profile, you have like an architectural background from Ghana and let's say United Kingdom rather, London. And so I just want to ask, like, what motivated the transition from architecture to like public service and advisory work that you currently do now?
While I was practicing, I of course worked on the in different organizations under different chartered architects before I founded my own practice. And I had a team. And the last project that I led in private practice was a beach resort. Opinion, we achieved a great feat, to say the least, in many ways. The project and the building in particular was, well, said by people who experienced the building or the space. I would say everyone who worked on the project in my team was about 34 years and younger. And this is a project that many contractors were not excited about because of the complexity of it. We were sort of naive in the fact that to be naive, in thinking that everything is possible in terms of achievement. So we did that. We're very proud of ourselves. In fact, we constructed the building particularly because we couldn't get contractors to execute. So we designed and we constructed the building. And by every standard, the building stands tall today for what they intended to achieve for relaxing, for rejuvenating. However, we quickly noticed that when we showed people in our villages, in our local communities, this building, and we tell them the story of how we achieved it and what it truly meant, it meant nothing to them. And it was then clear to us that, yes, we had the skills as architects, which is what we did, but we did not bring about social impact, which is what we are very interested in. And we started to recalibrate and say, okay, what are the other ways of achieving this? And this gave birth to a new list of projects and direction and interest for the company, which is Real Section Nigeria Limited. And essentially, we started to look more into things like affordable housing, solving the problem of housing in general. But for me also, I started to look beyond the platform. I started to look at other platforms that I could influence, that I could take advantage of to solve a much, much broader issue that I don't need to explain the impact I'm bringing. You feel that impact, So essentially, that's why public service became attractive to me, that it provided a platform for me to influence real change for my community using my skill sets. And yeah, so that was how that transition was made. And there was always the idea or the opportunity to transition into public service because of the social capital that I have. So of course, when I showed the willingness and the value I could bring to the table, that transition happened almost immediately. So yes, and ever since then, I'm grateful because what I intended to do or the areas where I intended to influence, since then I've been able to measure some of those parameters that I defined early on, and I would say that there's been remarkable progress in that.
You mentioned that you worked on a particular project, but you realized that at the end of the day, the project did not really bring about social impact. So I would just like to trace a little bit of background. There are a lot of organizations, particularly in the social impact space, like who actually organize a lot of programs, organize a lot of projects, and at the end of the day, they are not necessarily measuring the level of impact that they've been able to get in the shortest way possible. So I would just like to ask you, talking about social impact, how do you think you've measured your impact, like from when you started this journey, or how do you think, what advice will you give to young entrepreneurs, particularly under the Hult Prize umbrella, on how they could actually measure their impact? Yeah.
Okay. I think, and that's a very beautiful question, if I must say. I think for every discipline, for every subject matter, there is research and there is expert advice and views on what should be done and how it should be done. And I think that can form the basis of, or you can extract your indicators from best practice on those subjects. Sort of knew what our environment should be. And subconsciously, I set indicators. And I said, very simple, very basic, nothing complex. First off, we should have enough housing for the working class. There's nothing stopping us from having it at maybe community or state level. Number two, the quality of buildings being built in the environment is poor. Could it be the lack of expertise? Could it also be lack of regulations or lack of enforcement? Also, how are we, in terms of education, what is being put in place to ensure that the future is sustainable and the future is better than today? Because then again, those who you train today will build the future tomorrow. Or like some say, the future is being built now. And who are those building the future? What is the education like? So those are the areas that I said, okay, you know what? If I'm able to advise, I would advise along the lines of, policies, programs, and projects that can, help all of this thing. Saying that the advice was tailored to policy, programs, and projects, and essentially letting those at the helms of affairs understand from within that X and Y experts are needed in solving problems. According to, say, for example, the UN Habitat, they have a framework as far as affordable housing goes. And if you want to solve a problem, where you can easily start from such a framework. And this are the sort of people we put together. This is sort of expertise we need on board to explore this. So for me, that is already some level of success as far as bringing impact goes. The direction government should be taking, what is important, what should be prioritized, educating colleagues and maybe those who are also above my tier and also below my tier, the best way to go. And I think, for me, whether I'm here or not, I think people already have the idea that these are the sort of things, that is classified as best practice. And for me, that is a measure of success. Yeah.
All right. So, you serve as a special advisor to the governor of Ogun State on housing, OPIC, and special projects. So, what are the most critical ways for unlocking real estate investments and accelerating housing supply in the state? So, what has been your most effective methods for accelerating most of these projects? And okay, let's say we have a younger architect in the room and the person is willing to actually learn from you. So what has been the most impactful and critical measures you've put in place to accelerate investments, particularly in the real estate space?
It's beyond architects, it's beyond engineers. It's an ecosystem. So you have legal aspects, you have finance, you have land economy, you have architects, of course, engineers, you have distribution channels, you have PR. It's all encompassing, and I think what we are exploring currently as a government, because the current model is government currently focuses on developing affordable housing. And as you know, government has a capacity to what it can do, in terms of funding, in terms of human resource. So that's the current model. We put in our budget that, we want to build X amount of houses and we'll just go and do that. right? I'll tell you the administration I'm in has built more houses than all the other administrations that ever came before us combined. But I still tell you, it's still a far cry from solving the problem of affordable housing. So it means the current housing deficit in Ogun State ranges between 1 million to 1.5 million houses. So the question is, you need to bring in a lot of people, you need to collaborate across board. We're also doing some public-private partnership, but you need to collaborate across board in solving that problem. And one of the things we're currently looking at, such a way that is extremely accessible and affordable to those who have the finance to do it. Also, what is the current infrastructure that we can leverage on, for some of these housing clusters that can come about? What are the rail lines that are currently existing and new ones that we can do? So those are the things that we're currently working around in terms of planning. And those are the things that can accelerate development of real estate. Because at the end of the day, a city is made up of people who are trying to exchange goods and services. That's why people come into a place to settle. And what we're trying to do right now is to establish and fortify the channels that will bring people together to exchange those goods and services, so that we don't stretch the resources in terms of housing. We can make our cities more dense, which are the areas we're looking at, which means you stress less your limited infrastructure. And we're doing that, we're taking that approach because, of course, because we're government does not mean we have an endless, bottomless course, right? So those are the things we're looking to practice works, and we're looking at implementing those. So in a nutshell, we're accelerating real estate development by ensuring that, in terms of land, it's been democratized and is affordable. Also, we have the right infrastructure to support any dense community or any new community that comes up. And also, because the goal of this administration is to move Ogun State from a blue collar to a white collar economy. And if you need to do that, housing is fundamental. And we're taking that very seriously, essentially. Yeah.
All that you have said are like very, very wonderful, particularly your work in as a special advisor to the governor of Ogun State on housing, OPIC, and special projects. So what you'll be serving as a judge at the Hult Prize competition this, I don't know if it's April or May. So what do you particularly look forward to? Like, what kind of startups do you want to see, and what advice are you going to give to these startups?
Okay, so in terms of startups I'd like to see, I'm looking for startups that solve problems that are local. As you can see, and I don't know if it's the right step or the right direction for the world. The world is looking, is trying to turn the wheel around, because we say it's a global country. The globalization, the era of the globalization, we don't know if it's coming to an end. But if it's not, I think we need to focus more on ourselves as well. So solutions that solve problems locally, at community level, at state level, at national level, is what I'll be particularly looking at. Solutions that use local resources, be it natural and human resources, is what I'll be looking at. Solutions that are future-proof. In manufacturing now, there's huge deployment of AI in every aspect. Solutions that adopt such things. So basically appropriate technology, but future-proof. And I know appropriate technology, in many cases, we're not as advanced as some other climes, but I know we have the human resource, so we can think as well. We have brilliant brains here. So I'll give you an example. Personally, I have a startup called Baba Bamboo. And what Baba Bamboo does is to make hardware from bamboo. And yes, there's everybody's software is the focus, or when people talk about tech, most people are not talking about hardware, but you need hardware to power software, right? And the question is, most of the time we import this hardware. So do we need to move? We're refining petrol now, crude oil in Nigeria. And has this given us an insight to the fact that Nigeria can truly become a manufacturing country? The answer is yes. So if the answer is yes, what are we going to be manufacturing? I'm not looking forward to manufacture toothpaste from bamboo. I'm looking forward to manufacture interior components of cars from bamboo. Bamboo is sometimes considered as a weed, but I tell you what, in China, people make scaffold from bamboo 70 stories high. There's an airport, the interior of the airport completely built out of bamboo. And just there are many use cases for it. So the question is, and this is something that is being considered a weed here because we've not looked into it deeply. And in other climes, in fact, in Europe, Africa, and I tell you, bamboo doesn't grow in Europe. So those are the sort of solutions I'm looking to see. People rethinking what we have in our environment and not to rehash the 19th century or the 18th century, but to look ahead and say, okay, with what we have, how can we create a new? And how can we create a new to the benefit of all? All first before personal. And I think those are the sort of things that will elevate our country, our communities. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So I noted what you mentioned about localizing solutions. You mentioned most of the hardware that are used to produce some of the products we use today. Most of them are being imported, right? So you actually wanted like startups to start thinking because with what you said, with the way you've been speaking to me ever since the start of this conversation, you are speaking more from the builder's perspective. And I think your background in architecture and what you currently do has actually influenced that. So you are seeing some gaps that most of these startups are not going to be seeing themselves. So that being said, I would just like you to, that would be second to the last question. So I would just like you to tell us, what lesson do you think upcoming startups, particularly under the Hult Prize umbrella, can learn from your journey? You can use that to actually conclude and give your final notes too. Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, for me, I think one thing I've learned from my journey so far is sometimes things come around full circle, and it's usually a system and not an item. So in whatever solution you're trying to provide, it fits into an ecosystem or it's an ecosystem itself. And for something to fit into an ecosystem, you have to understand those other things that make up the ecosystem. So it's good to investigate a solution, to come about a solution, but it's more system. Is it taking away more than it's giving the ecosystem, or it's the reverse? So I think that is very, very important. And building is through, build credibility, I'd say, and not rhetoric. It's very easy to go on a tangent where you're a motivational speaker, I must say, but you have to stay disciplined, you have to get your hands dirty, you have to do the hard work, burn your candles, believe in yourself, believe it can work, learn from past mistakes, be creative in the way you think. And just, like I said, think beyond your solution and how it impacts others, and that's the real work that shapes, outcomes, especially at scale, because if you really want to deliver a solution that is impactful, it has to be at scale. And finally, like I said, just stay relentless, keep going. Change sometimes is slow, but if gotten right, it can be very, very impactful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the insights, and thank you so much for joining us on the Hult Prize Nigeria podcast today. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming around. And have a nice day.
Honor is mine. Thank you so much, Samuel.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.